I started playing Commander in April of 2022, and in an effort to better understand the game, or at least that's what I told myself, I was going to watch as many gameplay videos as possible. My friend who got me into the game was really amping up this new commander, KOMA, and it was because he had recently watched the Command Zone episode 42 where Jacob Bertrand had total control. It seemed unbeatable. Not to mention, it came out in a Nordic themed set, Kaldheim. As a new player, I barely knew which lands tap for which mana, but what I did know is that a Cosmic Serpent in Nordic times with snow-covered mountains for land was badass. And by God, did I watch episode 42 over and over. My feeble brain simply consumed the content, barely understanding how these interactions worked, but to this day, Jacob Bertrand remains one of my favorite players, and I do think it's because of this episode. But I'm not here to gush about Jacob, I'm here to talk about the commander that he played that game and see if his deck list really is up to snuff. The best place to start is in the opening statement about his commander. Let's listen to see what his deck goals were.
So the commander I built around is KOMA COSMOS SERPENT. This card is really powerful. I want to ramp into him as quick as possible, increase my token generation, and then I have a bunch of cards that just protect my command. I think as long as this thing stays on the battlefield, I can just ride him to victory.
I think that a key piece of information here is that first word he used. And no, it's not. So the word is ramp. Ramp is the key here. KOMA is a 7-cost commander, which normally that steep of a cost will take numerous turns to climb. However, he is in simic colors, blue and green. They are famous for having the ramp package built in with no real win con, but unfortunately for Rachel and Josh, this game, Jacob brought the win condition in his command zone.
Jacob brought the ramp package in full force with his deck list. There are 18 dedicated ramp cards. His actual deck list says 20, but I'm leaving out the Seedborn Muse and In Search of Greatness because these don't directly ramp him. But let me be very clear about something. Ramp is only powerful if you're able to back it up. But KOMA's so powerful, I hear you saying. Yeah, but then what? Where do we go from there? How do we actually close out the game? And more often than not, when you ramp hard, just like Jacob does in the early portion of this game, you're left with nothing in hand. No more gas, so to speak. Now, Jacob caught a lucky break in the early stages of the game on turn 2, playing an Arcane Signet into a Mystic Remora. He gets the best of both worlds, ramp and card draw. And if you aren't playing Mystic Remora, I would highly recommend you do. The game generally has trended toward higher power levels of play, and Mystic Remora gets better and better the higher power level you're playing at. No one will be paying the 4 to prevent you from drawing. And that's exactly what happens, allowing the young Bertrand to draw 2 additional cards off of his Remora. Before we're even able to get into the section of the video where I start to break his deck apart, Jacob comes out hot with the next big drop, Consecrated Sphinx. Arguably, this is just another one of those good stuff blue cards, but I find that the Consecrated Sphinx is way better in Simic decks because of the reliable nature of green ramp, which affords you these expensive creatures much earlier. And that really is the preferred time to play a card just like this one. It's easy to see how he was able to get ahead of everyone else in this particular episode of Game Nights. Between the Sphinx and the Remora, he drew 8 total cards. 8 cards for effectively 8 mana because he had to pay the upkeep cost on the Remora. Now that's a great deal at almost any stage of the game, but he did all of this by turn 4. That's just crazy.
Now Josh removes the Sphinx on his turn, but the damage has already been dealt. Jacob has the lethal combo ready. He has card advantage with an excessive amount of mana, which is the absolute wet dream for every single Simic player alive. I wanted to run out this scenario first to demonstrate what the goals of the deck are, but also what a good start really looks like. It's not immediately apparent, but running threats in the deck, such as the Consecrated Sphinx, do more than just draw cards. It also eats removal. And as we'll see, that removal Josh used on the Sphinx can now no longer be used on Jacob's commander, which Jacob plays next. But before we go any further into the game, let's sidestep into reviewing the deck. What do I like about it? What do I not like about it? Why is Brian Kibler's hair so perfect? All of these questions will be answered and more.
Clearly some of these cards wound up in Jacob's deck list more so out of the Kaldheim hype than to the actual benefit of his game plan. For example, let's take a look at this one, In Search of Greatness, which admittedly is a cool card until you realize once KOMA's out, there's literally nothing 8 CMC in Jacob's deck, which immediately makes this into a scry at your upkeep enchantment. And before you go defending it, just watch how it plays out for Rachel. This is one of those cards that can blow a game wide open, but 90+% of the time it just sits on the table not doing anything. You would need a more strict build around to make the enchantment work as intended, and it simply isn't the best here. Another one of those Kaldheim gems is Giant's Amulet. Now this never saw the light of day in game nights, but it's clear why it's in the deck. 3 total mana to give your commander hexproof, which is effectively just a worse version of Swiftfoot Boots. Now I think this is actually a sneaky good card in a budget format. 10 cents for decent hexproof giving artifact is not awful, but it comes with some downsides. Namely, it lacks the haste enabling of Swiftfoot Boots, but also it only works at sorcery speed, and as we'll see, instant speed interaction is absolutely necessary to protect KOMA.
There's actually something extremely cool about Jacob's deck that you didn't really get a chance to see. It's these cards right here, Proteus Staff and Polymorph. Now, there are entire decks built around these cards because you can structure it so you have one creature in the deck to hit, which normally is your win con, of course. But the reason it's in Jacob's deck is to harness more value from the coils. If you are incidentally making the KOMA coils, you might as well have something to do with them. And you can simply sacrifice the coil to one of these abilities to cascade into some huge creatures with game-altering effects. Bonus points if you trade one serpent with another. We saw a similar type of effect with Mystic Reflections. Let's watch how Jacob uses it.
But with those triggers on the stack, I'm gonna play my other foretell card, which is Mystic Reflection. Oh!
This is a brand new card from Kaldheim, and it's really interesting because this has great synergy with Jacob's deck. He knows he's gonna be making tokens all the time, and now he can switch it to something else that's really powerful on the board, so nice play.
Okay, and now one of my KOMA's coils is gonna come as a copy of Avengers Zendikar. Uh-oh. And it only copies the next creature that comes in, so the other creature's just a 3/3 serpent.
How many lands do you have?
I have 7.
Wow.
So I'll make 7 plant tokens.
Your Avenger's better than mine.
I absolutely love this card, but Jacob only showcased one way to use it. I can't tell you how many times that I've been screwed out of my commander because one of my friends uses it while my commander's entering the battlefield. That's right. You only need to target a non-legendary creature for something to become a copy of. This means your commander is fair game to turn into a Savannah Lions or some other meaningless creature entering the battlefield. I now run this card in as many blue decks as possible, and it's one of those cards that never feels bad to have in hand. I promise you, if you start running it, you'll be impressed just how much work it can actually put in. And that's just the floor. If you have a build around for this card, then you can quickly do some ludicrous things with it. Remember, it says whenever one or more creatures enter the battlefield, meaning if you have an effect that makes multiple tokens in a single trigger, all of those little tokens suddenly become some dangerous threats. Absolutely killer. Definitely include this card. While we're on the topic of interaction, I think now is a great time to talk about...
Fierce Guardianship.
No, what I meant to say was...
Fierce Guardianship.
Jacob, calm down.
Fierce Guardianship. Fierce Guardianship. Fierce Guardianship.
Okay, buddy, I think it's time to lay you down for a nap.
Now that Jacob's down, we can talk about protection. So yeah, we have a 7 mana commander, which tends to be a massive investment on our behalf. So having protection is absolutely necessary. And the spells that Jacob chose are quite good. I'm in fact very pleased with our package. I built KOMA as one of my very first commander decks, and the biggest issue I had was not having enough mana to properly cast my protection. That would really be the only issue that I have. Things like the standard counterspell or a Narset's Reversal sometimes will be too expensive to reliably cast, and that sounds crazy, but trust me, we still need to advance our game plan even after we have our commander out, which is why I absolutely love the Swan Song and Fierce Guardianship here. The thing is, we can actually take this in multiple different directions. If you want to keep the power level down somewhat, you could simply add in ways for our tokens to effectively tap for mana, like the Cryptolith Rite Jacob has in his deck, and that'll afford us the more expensive counterspells. But if you wanted to spice things up, then you can go crazy with Pact of Negation, Force of Negation, Force of Will, all of those free counter spells that you've come to know and hate. I think I hear Jacob waking up. Better move on to the next section.
I think now is as good a time as ever to point out that Jacob had an absolutely killer pod to play KOMA in. Now, Jimmy was on Magda, which can easily get blocked and die to a million different KOMA coils. Poor Rachel's Squirrel was tapped down for nearly the entire game because she went with more of a Voltron strategy. And let's see what Josh had to say about his predicament.
I'm kind of realizing that Jacob's commander is a really bad matchup for me. I need my commander to attack to untap my stuff. If he just taps it down before combat, I can't do that. So that cuts my mana production in half. This sucks.
I felt it necessary to point this out because KOMA is a big threat, and in my experience, unless you have the right pod, you'll simply get hated out of the game before you can really get going. It's the same experience as playing something like my Ovika Enigma Goliath, and I love my Ovika deck, but you can bet on someone holding up a counter spell because they don't want to deal with it once it finally hits the board.
This next section is titled Greed, or maybe a more apt title is Enchantments that don't do anything on their own. You see, these enchantments right here are completely at home in a commander pod. It's largely accepted that Doubling Season is an extremely powerful effect, alongside others like Parallel Lives and Primal Vigor. The only token doubler I really have an issue with is this one, Primal Vigor. Why is that? Well, let's play out a scenario and see if you agree with me. As of right now, 26 of the top 100 commander decks in the past 2 years produce tokens. Now, Primal Vigor is a symmetrical effect, meaning that our opponents also get the benefit of doubling up on tokens. Small problem though. The optimal time to play these token doublers is before KOMA hits the battlefield, so we can set ourselves up to take over the game. But if 26 of the top 100 care about tokens and a handful more care about +1 counters, roughly 1/3 of the time, we'll be in a pod where our opponents also want an effect like this, and they can use it before us, which is terrifying. Now, I'm okay with some greed, but at least make it so it won't help our opponents. Just imagine if Jacob had out the Primal Vigor when Jimmy was making those treasures in the episode. The game would have been over so soon. Before we move on to the cuts, I want to point out a card that I've seen played far too often, Helm of the Host. Now, if you're a dedicated Godo deck that wants to go infinite with this, go right ahead. If you want to have a way of cheating the equip cost, go ahead. But I'll be rolling over in my grave if I have to pay 9 mana just to get this thing on the board and equip it. Not to mention the even bigger target it paints on your back. If you're going to paint a target on your back, do it for less than 9 mana. Just make 2 copies of KOMA with your clones for all I care. The Helm is just way too slow for a Simic deck with heavy ramp-based effects. We have better things to be doing with our mana, more explosive things. And when I start to make cuts, we'll need to make room for more improved performance. But most importantly, I think we need to take a closer look at Jacob's win cons and find an area to double down on. I want to show you a snip of the episode which really encapsulates this quote-unquote win condition.
And that will leave me dead. And then I die to a bunch of serpents.
Because I love my creatures so much, I'm gonna play Heroic Intervention.
Oh my gosh.
So all your stuff lives?
All my stuff lives.
Had it the whole time. Well, none of my creatures take damage because of vigor, but it doesn't matter because I do. And then I die to a bunch of KOMA's coils.
Right. Well, at least he's internally consistent with what he said he was going to do, which is make tokens and protect KOMA. But if his primary win condition is to just make tokens and swing, then I think that we can do a little bit better. Now, ultimately, I want to keep in mind that this is a Game Nights episode, and it also aired in February of 2021, and that means no modern cards will be included, only things that would have been out at the time of the Kaldheim release. So I'm going to cut most of the cards we've already talked about, and then you and I will reconvene to see the new important includes.
Alright, so here's my updated deck list. I tried very hard to keep the overall spirit of the deck intact as I included new cards. After cleaning up the mana base, I moved on to the ramp package. There were far too many 2-mana ramp sources. We have a 7-mana commander, so I included cards like Migration Path, and also cards like Explosive Vegetation. Reason being, we can play these on our turn when we hit 4 mana, jump up to 6, and then the very next turn we can reliably play KOMA. It's going to add some consistency to our game plan, which I think was somewhat lacking on Jacob's deck list. A card that I was extremely surprised that wasn't in the original deck list was this one, Elemental Bond. This is an extremely cheap enchantment with massive payoff potential. No longer do we have to pay the 5 mana for Kindred Discovery, when this card nets us a majority of the value for less mana and also less pip requirements. Now, I can see an argument to keep Kindred Discovery on board, and you're more than welcome to make the swap back, but I think that this gets us a majority of the value that we were otherwise looking for in a cheaper card overall. We also cut out the Primal Vigor in favor of this one, Adrix and Nev Twincasters. They're cheaper to cast, and also they don't benefit our opponents like the original did. Before we move on to the final includes, I want to talk about this guy, Spawning Kraken. Now, I have a confession. This guy came out 2 months after the Kaldheim release, and I know I said I was going to keep the things that came out before, but this card is just so good that I had to include it in this list, especially for those of you that are looking to perhaps build it. This card is 6 mana, and it's basically a win condition in a bottle. Give it a try.
I want you guys to get really close for this. No, not so close. Okay, better. I included a Craterhoof Behemoth. I know, this card is cheesy and overplayed, but I'm trying to stick with the Game Night's internal consistency here, and there have been hoofs in various other episodes of Game Nights. And I'm sure they don't encourage that they run it in their future episodes now, but most of us will never be on their show, so I guess we don't have to worry about that. Then also, at least in analyzing Jacob's deck, he's running a card like Court of Calling, and why are we running this card if not to close the game out? That's also why in my deck version, I included a Finale of Devastation. Games have to end, guys, and if we're gonna go through all the work to make a bunch of 3/3 serpents, how else are we supposed to close the game out without including a bunch of stacks pieces? I think it's unfortunately a necessary evil unless you wanna go the more heavy stacks route, and in that case, you may end up losing your playgroup. So pick your poison.
This game was awesome. I know I was kind of arch enemy for a long time, but man, that was a wild ride. There was a lot of points where I really felt like I could win, and I totally thought I was gonna lose.
What a fun episode. This still sticks with me to this day as one of my all-time favorite Game Nights episodes, and with good reason, I think. And I'm so happy that I was able to go back with everybody and revisit this episode. I certainly think that Call Time had some stronger commanders and also some stronger singles than KOMA, but nothing brings out my inner Timmy more than a giant Nordic-themed world serpent slowly constricting our opponents. And Jacob, if you watch this, hit me up, homie, and we can have a KOMA off.
Fierce Guardianship.
Yeesh, this guy. I'm extremely pleased with how the first few episodes of this series have turned out, and if you want to see more like it, please be sure to like the video and also comment on the video. Also, at the time of making this, I don't receive any type of monetary kickback, so if you could kindly subscribe to show that I'm doing a good job, I would really appreciate it. Support my addiction so I can continue supporting your addiction. I've been Kyle, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.